Thomas Jefferson is one of the most important pieces of evidence to their friendship and their common ideas. Philologist Adamantius Κοραής and the third American president, Thomas Jefferson, exchanged important correspondence during the Greek War of Independence. During that period, Κοραής made serious efforts to help the struggle for the Greek independence, writing articles or corresponding with important personalities. Κοραής had a deep knowledge of the nation's arts and culture, and he was one of the most important representatives of the modern Greek Enlightenment, as well as an instigator of the Greek Revolution. He was also a pioneer in the publication of ancient Greek philosophy and literature. Thomas Jefferson, the third president of the United States of America, served 2 consecutive terms and was the main author of the Declaration of Independence. The two men met during Jefferson's 5-year stay in Paris. The well-educated American politician had the reputation of being a liberal and progressive man, having regrettably expressed his great admiration for the ancient Greeks. He had met with Κοραής several times. They soon developed a friendly relationship. This relationship convinced Κοραής that Jefferson was the right person to actually contribute to the cause of the struggling Greeks, even if he was living on the other side of the Atlantic. The Κοραής Central Public and the Historical Library of Chios manuscript collection consists of 3 letters with a tax number 537, 539, and 541. The first one, written in English with a number 537, is a draft from Κοραής to Thomas Jefferson, dated July 10, 1923, and another second letter dated December 28, 1823. The second manuscript, with the number 539, is the answer of Thomas Jefferson to Κοραής, dated October 31, 1923, written in French. The third, with the number 541 in English, is the last letter from Κοραής to Jefferson, dated January 30, 1825. Κοραής sent a total of 3 letters to Jefferson, who replied to only one. In any case, the letter, which is 7 pages long, is very important because it provides advice for all the formation of the new Greek state. It was an honor that the American politician wrote such a long and significant letter, which was also tangible proof of Jefferson's true feelings towards the Greeks. The American politician received Κοραής' letter on October 2, 1823. A few weeks later, he wrote a lengthy reply, which he sent to his Greek friend, though the American consul in Paris, who was Κοραής' neighbor. In the text, Jefferson clarified from the outset the official policy of his homeland, which was complete neutrality and non-involvement in European affairs. He then made clear that the belief that the ancient Greek model of government was inapplicable, and explained the American model, which functioned through the use of delegates, which he hastened to contrast with the British parliamentary model. Jefferson also made an extensive report on the separation of powers, constitutional text, and the method of election of judicial officials, even submitting specific proposals which would be implemented in the Greek state, which was soon to be established. The former American president also outlined the basic principles governing the American Constitution and briefly described the education system in the homeland. Most of the suggestions Jefferson made were not applicable to the birth of the new liberated Greece. Yet the most important ideas of justice and equal rights were there. celebrating the 200 years of the Greek Revolution and the tragical fact of the massacres of Chios, we thought it was an excellent opportunity for our library to make a remarkable editor of 72 pages representing for the first time 3 manuscripts from 1823 and 1825. The publication of the correspondence between Jefferson and Κοραής sheds light into their distinctive personalities. Sadly, the editor of this edition, a president of our council board, Mr. Konstantinos Merousis, has passed away. This project became one of his top priorities, and I am sure that he would be very happy and proud to see it coming to fruition and see you visiting our library today. I think it would be an act of recognition to devote our meeting to his memory. He had the honor to collaborate with Dr. Michael Plakotaris and Mrs. Katerina Karavasili, who gladly accepted the challenge of delving into thought of both these great men and work in earnest. Today they are here with us to communicate their experience of contributing to this edition. Today it's a historical moment for our library because it's the first time after 200 years that a representative of the Thomas Jefferson Foundation is here at our library. Today, we also have the special opportunity to introduce our library to you and to map a new strategy towards a collaboration between the Thomas Jefferson Foundation and the Κοραής Central Public and Historical Library of Chios that will strengthen our friendship and create common grounds of reference. Now, Mr. Manolis Vournous will come.
Director of Κοραής Library. My name is Manolis Vournous. I'm the Vice President on the board of Κοραής Library, and I would like to welcome you all on Chios and in Κοραής Library. Κοραής Library was based on the donation after the will of Κοραής himself of his own library. It was this library which constitutes still the basic the very foundation actually of our library, together with many other donations given by many Chians and many people who have greatly contributed to the development of this library today. So, Professor, welcome, and hope to enjoy your visit and strengthen our common.
Thank you very much. Madam Director, Vice President, Deputy Mayor, representatives of the government here in Chios, we're very flattered and honoured to have this welcome. We're thrilled to be here. The Jefferson talked about the boisterous seas of liberty, and we experienced them in the last few days. We weren't sure we would make it. We particularly want to thank Maria Baklava, who has been instrumental in arranging this and making the introductions, and we're very thrilled. About a week before I sailed, I was given a special mission by the editor of the Thomas Jefferson papers. I didn't know this was going to be so important. I didn't realize that we do not have a good facsimile of this very important letter, let alone Korai's replies. So we're hoping to get very good copies of the original to use. The editor of the Jefferson papers, Jeff Looney, said that he will send you the definitive edition, and the volume in which this letter appears, which will be in a couple of years. The project started in 1950, and that's when the first volume appeared. It started in the 1940s, just after the Second World War. Well, there was still a war. It was not a reality, it was an aspiration. It went on till at least 29. And America is about to celebrate the 250th year of its Declaration of Independence in 2026, and there'll be other celebrations before that. So we could do some joint celebrations. It's nice to think of the way that America was influenced by Greek ideas, but then would try to inspire Greece and support Greece. Jefferson had so hoped that more European countries would become republics, that this would be the system of government of the future. There was one particular line in the letter I love. He said, "Leave it until after the war to write the Constitution. You need to write that in some peace and when you're reflective and thoughtful."
The Bible school, which is just next door to us, and this connection between the library as part of the educational system, an indispensable part, and the connection between education and democracy is exactly what we celebrate with this library and with the existence of the library at the very heart of our city. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. We must see that your deceased director is acknowledged in the Jefferson papers, and Maria, because she's been instrumental. The editor of the Jefferson papers teases me and says, "You historians, your work is dead in 10 years. You know, you go out of fashion." These papers are forever, they're immortal, and they're the definitive edition. Much better to be in those acknowledgements than mine.
Thank you so much. Now we can visit our library. If someone wants to have a little time for break.
Outside.
Well, Professor, there's not much to say for us. I did the Greek translation to Greek for the English version. This day today is really emotionally charged for us, because we were close friends to the late president of the Κοραής library, Mr. Konstantinos, and we really felt honored, me and Catherine, when he asked us to do both the Greek and the translation from the French. So I approached this letter with apprehension. I had heard of Thomas Jefferson, but I hadn't really read anything that he had written. So I went out and read books before attempting to translate them. And I saw videos, and I talked to people, American friends, for example, about it. And slowly there emerged an image of a man who struck me with awe. Not only because he, in his 80s, he wrote this letter I was translating, and he really cared about the Greek revolution and about seeing the Greeks becoming independent. He was a man who cared deeply about that. And he respected Κοραής and he treasured their friendship. And for us, as Greeks, modern Greeks today, and for us as people who have been born on this island and standing today before you in this building that bears his name, this is particularly important. Thank you very much.
Good morning and welcome to here. I'm sorry my English is not very good because I'm a little friends. I will do my best. We were honored to be asked for our assistance by the late president of the Κοραής Public Library, who translated the specific handwritten letters Armadus Κοραής exchanged with Thomas Jefferson. I translated from French to Greek the 3 letters that Κοραής sent to Thomas Jefferson. I considered it a challenge to tackle such a project, to get my hands on it and help ensure that the resulting publication is part of this institution which contributes to the promotion of the public library and also to the highlighting of its rich material. Thank you very much.
Υποδεχτήκαμε σήμερα μία κρουαζιέρα η οποία κάνει στάση στη Χίο. Είναι ένα μικρό γκρουπ, 30 ατόμων περίπου, στο σύνολό τους ακαδημαϊκοί, διακεκριμένοι περισσότεροι από τις ΗΠΑ, οι οποίοι με επικεφαλής της ομάδας έναν εξαιρετικό καθηγητή από το Πανεπιστήμιο της Βιβλ, αντιπρόεδρο του Ιδρύματος Τζέφερσον, επισκέπτονται την βιβλιοθήκη του Κοραή σήμερα προκειμένου να δουν τα χειρόγραφα, τις χειρόγραφες επιστολές που φυλάσσονται εδώ του Κοραή, μέρος από την βιογραφία που είχε ο Θεματικός Κοραής με τον Τζέφερσον. Είναι μια προσπάθεια που κάνουμε σε συνεργασία με ένα εξαιρετικό γραφείο των Ηνωμένων Πολιτειών που έχει στηθεί από Έλληνες ευγενείς, να μπορέσουμε να φέρουμε έτσι θεματική κρουαζιέρα στο νησί. Είναι μια προσπάθεια, πρέπει να πω, μια σχέση η οποία αναπτύχθηκε αρχικά από την περιφέρεια, από τον κύριο Μίλτα και την Αγγελική Τουρμπακά, και συνεχίζουμε εμείς στο Δήμο τη συνεργασία με το συγκεκριμένο γραφείο, με τη συγκεκριμένη εταιρεία. Θα ακολουθήσουν άλλες 4 κρουαζιέρες μέσα στο επόμενο διάστημα και ελπίζουμε και στο μέλλον να συνεργαστούμε και σε άλλα κομμάτια, άλλα αντικείμενα, πάντα έτσι θεματικά. Αυτή τη στιγμή μέσα στην αίθουσα δίδεται διάλεξη από τον καθηγητή, τον Αμερικανό, για την ιστορία της περιοχής, για την ελληνική ιστορία, για την ιστορία της μοντέρνας Ελλάδας και φυσικά για τη σχέση του Κοραή με τον Τζέφερσον και πώς αυτή η σχέση επηρέασε τόσο την ανεξαρτησία της Ελλάδας όσο και την πολιτική και την δημοκρατία στην Αμερική.
Political models on the Americans of the Revolution, and later I'll talk a bit about their relationship to the Greek Revolution. So I would emphasize from the start that during the debates in Congress, during the Revolutionary War, during the debates on the Constitution, and afterwards, Greek writers, Greek political models were cited. The Federalist Papers were published to defend the Constitution and to persuade people to vote for the Constitution. The Constitution went through a period of, where each state either voted for or against the Constitution. The Federalist Papers tried to persuade them to vote for, and these included a lot of references to the Greeks. Of all the founders who most admired the Greeks and was most familiar, and this was important, he was most familiar with the ancient Greek language, was Thomas Jefferson. He said in his late old age, "I thank God, I go down on my knees and thank God that my father introduced me to the classics." He said it had given him a sort of privilege, that it had been one of his greatest benefits in life was to be able to read these books, and in his late old age he returned to reading them in their original. Jefferson, as a young man, copied out passages of Homer and Euripides, and was especially interested, more than any other founder, in the Greek political models. John Adams, who actually did not write the Constitution, nor did he write the Declaration of Independence, but it was his ideas about balanced government and checks and balances that were to prevail in the national system of government. He developed them originally for Massachusetts. Adams was particularly interested in Polybius, the Greek writer who talked about balanced government without checks and balances, and I'll be going into more detail about that in a moment. Adams admitted he had real trouble reading Greek, and that he preferred the Romans, ancient Rome. And this is true of a lot of the American founders. But it was through the Romans that they discovered their Greek. And the Romans were some of the greatest purveyors. I called them Platonists during this voyage. They didn't add a lot philosophically or in terms of political models to the Greeks. They admired the Greeks, fortunately, and helped preserve a lot of Greek culture, even copying statues for which we no longer have the original. And Adams especially admired Cicero. Well, Cicero came to Greece to study rhetoric. And Cicero was one of the biggest Roman admirers of the Greeks and helped ancient Rome become familiar with the legacy of the Greeks. And Cicero was the favorite author of all of the founders. George Washington, for example, was a big admirer. James Madison is regarded as the father of the American Constitution, and he regularly cited, during the constitutional debates, both Greek and Roman authors and precedents. Madison went to Princeton University, despite being a southerner. He went north, and he was educated by a Scottish Enlightenment professor, the Reverend Witherspoon, John Witherspoon, who basically gave them a classical curriculum. And we'll see this was true of the elite of America in the 18th, throughout the 19th century, as the Civil War, were largely trained with a classical curriculum. That was at the center. Alexander Hamilton did not admire the Greek example. It was not that he didn't admire the Greeks, but he felt the Greeks had failed. They'd been too disunited. And Hamilton, of course, wanted to make the case for a strong central government. He was at the opposite end of the political spectrum from Jefferson. And so Hamilton held up the Greeks as an example to avoid, but even Hamilton used Greek examples and adopted a Greek name, Phocion, who was the name of a great general, to make some of his points. They often used pseudonyms of the Greeks and Romans when they were writing anonymously in the newspapers. And I do want to emphasize that it's not just the political ideas that influence America. America is also one adopted an aesthetic, a look, its buildings, its architecture, its statues. Its statues were influenced by the Greeks and Romans. Jefferson took a particular interest in this, and you find this quite a bit with independence leaders. They're not just concerned with the ideas, they're concerned with creating a new literature, a new look, an independent identity from the colonizing power. And Jefferson was particularly instrumental in getting some of the great sculptors from Europe to come and model all the leading founders, so that there would be this visual record. Jefferson recognized from Greek history that constitution makers and people who are revolutionaries are the people best remembered in their country. He knew about Lycurgus and Solon, and he knew how important these people would be in the memory of a country, and he was determined to record them, not least his own posterity. Like most political figures, he was interested in his own legacy as well, but there was a genuine concern too for the benefits and interests of the country. One of the people he obtained from France was Antoine Houdin, who made statues and busts of the leading American revolutionaries. If you look at the nickel, the 5-cent coin, on one side is Jefferson's head, on the other side is Monticello. Jefferson's head is based on the bust by Houdin, which incidentally Monticello only acquired since I've been working there, which has been 19 years. Jefferson commissioned this statue to go in the rotunda, the Capitol in Richmond, capital of Virginia, of George Washington. It's regarded as the best likeness, the best statue, and you'll notice that he's wearing his uniform, so he's not made to look like an ancient. Earlier, they used to dress up in togas, even in the 18th century, and copy the Romans. But our excellent guide, Aristoteles, points out with all these statues, one foot is forward. You'll notice one foot is forward. Although this is probably more a copy of a Roman statue, the real influence on the Romans in statuary was Greek. He also persuaded Canova, and this was about shortly before he corresponded with Corrèze. He persuaded Canova to come from Italy to do another posthumous model of George Washington. Most of you will never have seen this, not even those of you from the United States. And here he is wearing a toga, and he is in the classical garb, which is somewhat unusual, because later on they tended to discard this. This is actually from a recent exhibit by the Frick Collection, and this statue was commissioned by the state of North Carolina, but it was destroyed in a freak fire almost as soon as it was exhibited in 1821. And what we have are the models from the artist's studio that were being used to create the final sculptor. And they came across to the United States for the first time about 4 years ago to the Frick Collection in New York. But this was the idea. What they wanted to achieve was to show America as a civilized country on an equal footing with Europe.